Great to be back here with you, celebrating my birthday with you today. This is a special place. I wanted to come here for my birthday, so thank you so much for your prayers earlier. And also, too, it's been a joy to be back here. We have another group of students for the Expositors Academy training, and some of those victims are actually from your congregation. We have one up here in front. Notice he was suffering all week, and he's trying to recover, but actually, it's a great joy to have them here and be able. There's almost 50 guys for this third batch, so please be praying for them. Pray especially for Nigel and the other guys that are a part of that. Well, I didn't mention my age, but I'll give you a hint. I was actually alive when the first man landed on the moon. I was just a few years old, and my dad got me a picture when I was a little boy of Buzz Aldrin standing next to the American flag. It's one of the most famous pictures in history. He was actually on the moon. I remember even as a little kid, I was like amazed and fascinated. How did they got a guy all the way up on the moon? And as I grew older, I became even more amazed at that feat because I realized, they did this without, we have laptops and cell phones, and these days we have, they didn't have at that time things like that, these gadgets, these modern devices. There was no Elon Musk, there was no SpaceX, and they still, within 10 years, got 3 astronauts up to the moon, and what's even more amazing, brought them back safely. Now, it took more than just those 3 astronauts to perform that feat, right? There were dozens of people in a control room in Houston, Texas, who were monitoring the systems on the spacecraft and paying attention to the data. Then behind them, there were hundreds of engineers who were also examining data and making sure everything was okay. Behind them, there were those who designed the parts and did all of the work to make this mission happen over the course of several years. In fact, at one point, they estimated over 400,000 people were working on the Apollo 11 mission, people from all over the world. And for this impossible mission to happen, those people had to partner together, because if they didn't, it could mean failure. And as I thought about that we too have been given a seemingly impossible mission, haven't we, to make disciples of all the nations? The Great Commission, of course, and we have many obstacles to that mission. There are many challenges, hindrances. We have a great enemy who opposes us in this mission. And there are many people around the world who are a part of this mission. And I think for us to accomplish the mission Christ has given us to make disciples, to do that, we need to work together. There must be a partnership. And of course, there are many ways to do that, right? We can work together, partner together, doing outreaches, doing various missions projects. We can partner together in financially, partner together in sharing our skills and abilities, doing training. There's many ways that we can do that. But today I want to focus on what I think is one of the more important, if not the most important way to partner together, and that is through prayer. Through prayer. I want to talk this morning about the role of prayer in discipleship, the role of prayer in carrying out the Great Commission. What did you say? That Jesus' last command should be our first concern. And so how do we accomplish that last command, which should be our first concern? I think partnering together in prayer is important. Paul often focused on partnership that we have in the gospel. He opened Philippians 1:3 with these words. He said, "I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now." Paul expresses his gratitude for them and their partnership, and he uses the word there, koinonia, this intimate sharing, this fellowship, this close partnership in Christ's mission to make disciples. And we're all in this mission together if you're one of his. We're all in this mission together, though we may be separated by location, by background, by ethnicity, by culture, by experience, by skills. God uses all of those things, by the way, for us working together in this mission. It's interesting, too. Paul used many terms in the New Testament with those who are working alongside him in the mission, such as co-laborer, fellow worker, partner. See, because Paul realized it wasn't his mission. It wasn't he wasn't the one planting the churches. He wasn't the only one carrying out these responsibilities. He worked with a team, and he understood this is Christ's mission, and we're in it together. And so he saw those who worked with him not as those under him, but as co-workers, co-laborers, partners. And so we too are partners together in this mission. And if we're to carry it out, I think if we're to succeed in doing it the way Christ wanted, we need to be going to the great disciple maker and asking him for help again together. So today I want to turn our attention to a few familiar passages that I think reflect this idea of partnering together in the mission through prayer. And the first one I want to take you to is in Matthew chapter 9. I think many of these texts will be familiar to you, but I want to take you to these passages and just draw out a few principles in regards to partnering together in the mission through prayer, the role of prayer in discipleship. And the first one, again, is in Matthew chapter 9. As we're going through Matthew's gospel, Matthew is focusing on Jesus as the king. And so he begins his gospel identifying him as the king. And then in chapters 5 to 7, the message of the king is delivered in the Sermon on the Mount. And then in chapters 8 and 9, the ministry of the king, where Jesus then is going around interacting with, encountering various people who are suffering from disease, from poverty, from oppression. And so look with me at Matthew 9, beginning in verse 35. How does Jesus respond to this? How does this affect him? It says there, Jesus was going, in verse 35, through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest." So as Jesus looks upon the masses, as he interacts with all of these people, as he sees the challenges they face and the health problems and the financial problems, being oppressed by Satan, suffering the consequences of sin, living life in a fallen world, as Jesus encounters these people, how does he respond? What does he think? What does he feel? What does the text tell us? He feels compassion for them, right? He turns to his disciples and he says, basically, these words, right? The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So beseech, pray, beg the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his field. Now, I find this interesting as Jesus looks at them as sheep who are distressed, who are downtrodden, who are downcast, who are discouraged. As he looks at them, he tells the disciples, we need to pray. You need to pray. Which is kind of interesting. He doesn't first tell them preach. He tells them pray. Now, right after that, he will send them out to preach, to proclaim. But the first thing he does is he says, you need to go before the Lord of the harvest and beg for workers to go into that harvest. Because what is it that he saw? What was the people's greatest need as he looked upon the masses? Was it their poverty? Was it their health problems? Was it their sickness and disease? Certainly those are challenges, and certainly those are important things that we need to offer help as we can. But what was the greatest need as he looked upon the masses? What was their ultimate problem? Right? Their sin, which has caused a separation between them and God, and if that sin is not dealt with, they'll suffer an eternity apart from God. Do you recognize the ultimate problem that you and I face? It wasn't just a problem for them in Jesus' day, it's a problem for all of us, isn't it? Because the Bible's very clear. We are all sinners. We've all turned against God. We're all sinners in need of a Savior. And so as God looks upon us as the masses, it's the same thing. We also are like sheep without a shepherd. We too are lost. We too are without hope. We too need to be forgiven. We too need to be cleansed of our sin. Have you asked God for forgiveness? Have you truly recognized the Lord Jesus Christ as the only one who can cleanse you from your sin, the only one who can forgive you because of his death on the cross and his resurrection from the dead? That really is our greatest need. And so, Jesus has provided the answer. And here he tells his disciples, we need to beg, pray for the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the field so that they too can hear this message, so that they too can have the ultimate problem in their life dealt with and receive that forgiveness. But notice Jesus does more than just request when he says send workers. What kind of workers is he talking about here? Certainly those who would bring the message of the gospel, right? Certainly those who would bring the message of hope and salvation that would take place as Jesus gives his life on the cross and then is raised from the dead. But notice he says that the people are like sheep without a what? Without a shepherd. It's not just that they need to be brought to Christ, they also need to learn how to grow in Christ. Isn't that the Great Commission? It's not just bringing the gospel, but it is also helping people to grow in the gospel, right? Didn't it make disciples of all the nations? How? What are the two things? Baptizing them, that is bringing them to Christ, and teaching them to obey all that Christ has commanded. And so we even see that here in the request that they would send out workers, that beg the Lord of the harvest for workers to go out for these sheep who are without a shepherd. They're downcast. So this reminds us the Great Commission is, again, not just to bring the lost to Christ, but to help them grow in Christ. People need to be led to salvation and sanctification. And so we need to pray that God would raise up not only those who will baptize, but also those who would teach. We need to pray and beseech the Lord of the harvest, not just for evangelists, but also for shepherds. We need to pray not just for churches to be planted, but also to be pastored. Because if the church is to make an impact, it must be led by godly shepherds. Well, how does this apply to us? Was that statement from Christ, that instruction from Jesus to his disciples, only meant for the disciples? Were they the only ones in the history of the earth that he wanted to beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers? I don't think so, right? Because in the Great Commission, which comes later, that is not just for the disciples either, but for all of us. We too are called to be praying for workers. We too need to be praying for those who will be raised up, not only to bring the gospel, but also to shepherd the flock. Do you do that? Are you committed to that? Do you beseech? Again, the idea here is not just ask, but really the sort of beg, an urgent request for God to raise up evangelists. And are we doing that together, to raise up evangelists and shepherds from among us? From among us here. And then even abroad, right? It's not just we partner together here within this body of Christ, but also within the body of Christ universal, right? So we need to be praying for God to raise up evangelists and pastors and shepherds in other lands. There are many places where it's very difficult. And the gospel, there are very few believers. So we need to be praying for so many countries around the world, every country around the world, honestly, but especially in places like Pakistan and Cambodia and Indonesia, Malaysia, China, Russia, many places in Africa. Pray for God to raise up workers. Pray for ministries like the Expositors Academy and others that are committed to training pastors and shepherds. Let us partner together in this way. Pray for workers. Will you commit to do that? Pray for God to raise up workers among us. Pray secondly for witness. Look with me at Colossians chapter 4. Colossians 4. This letter to the Colossians, which Paul wrote, the Colossians were being attacked by various false doctrines, mysticism and atheism and human philosophy, a works-based religion, paganism. They were under attack from all these things, so Paul writes this letter to tell them to keep hold of Christ. Don't let go of him. Don't be distracted away from him, but walk in him. And at the very end of the letter, the last instruction he gives is on prayer. And as we approach chapter 4, verse 2, listen to these words that he gives to the Colossians. Again, the last instruction he has. He says, devote yourselves, verse 2, to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open up to us a door for the word, so that we may speak forth the mystery of Christ, for which I have also been imprisoned, that I may make it clear in the way I ought to speak. So notice here, right, Paul opens up the topic, focuses on prayer, right? He says, be devoted to prayer. Be focused on, pray persistently, pray earnestly, pray unceasingly, steadfastly, be strong in prayer. And then he adds to that, be on the alert. It's this idea of keeping watch, paying attention, looking around for needs to bring before the Lord. Give careful attention to these things. But notice here, Paul doesn't just give this general statement or general instruction, does he? There's a specific thing he wants them to be devoted in prayer to. Did you see it? Notice again. He says, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time as well for God to open up a what? A door for us. What did he mean by that? A door for the word. He was asking them to pray for him for gospel opportunity. Notice, he's asking them to pray for him for gospel opportunity. Do we do that with one another? We should be praying for one another and the needs that we have, but specifically as we look at this passage, we need to be praying for one another for open doors for the gospel, which means we need to be talking about this with each other, right? I had a great conversation yesterday with AI, and he was telling me of a coworker that he's been trying to share with. And so that was wonderful. Now I'm praying for this coworker and praying for AI that God would open up doors for the gospel. We need to do that, not just for ourselves, but notice here, Paul says, pray for me for this. Are you doing that for one another? Praying for open doors for the gospel for one another. It can be very difficult to share the gospel. And so we need God to open up that door, don't we? He's the one that can set up the circumstances. You know, when my wife and I came to the Philippines back in July, we were in the Los Angeles airport, and we were walking to the gate, and they put Philippine Air way in the farthest gate. I mean, it's like 1.5 kilometers to get out there. So we're walking, and all of a sudden my wife goes, oh no, I forgot something at the security gate. I was like, oh no. And so I said, okay, I'll go to the gate. I'll make sure they don't fly off without us. And she was going to go back and get this item. And so I'm there at the gate waiting. I'm getting a little nervous. And then she comes finally, and she's smiling. She says, I had a chance to share the gospel. Because I guess there was an older gentleman who was right in that area where she had left this item. And so as she was picking it up, and she got into this brief conversation with him, and the Lord opened up a door like right away. And she had a chance to share with him just in the few minutes that she was with him. That was a God thing, wasn't it? She just happened to forget this item, which I got frustrated over, and then later was laughing. It's like God used that to open up a door for the gospel there in the airport as we're headed away. So God is the one who opens up these opportunities. So we need to be actively praying for them, praying for witness, for each other. Again, that's the emphasis here, for each other. Are you devoted to doing that? Because again, we're reminded this is a partnership. And notice too, Paul not only asks them to pray for an open door for the gospel, but then he ends it with, and pray that I may make it clear in the way I ought to speak. What is he asking for there? Not just for the open door, but then for the words to say, for the wisdom to know what to say and how to say it, that he would be clear as he presents that message. We need to be praying for one another in that way as well. Not just for the door to speak, the opportunity to speak, but then the wisdom to know what to say, right? Some people, especially those in our family, can be very difficult to share the gospel with, right? And we need wisdom. How do we do that? especially with our parents or our lola or lolo. Sometimes they can be the hardest to share the gospel with. They know us. But we need to. So we need to be asking each other, would you please pray for me for an open door to share the gospel with this family member or this friend or coworker? And would you also pray that God would give me the wisdom to know? Now, if we're having those kind of conversations, what is that going to foster among us? Right? Now I'm going to be curious. Next time I come here and I talk with AI, I'm going to ask him, I've been praying for this. How's it going? Right? And not to make him feel bad, but just because we're partners in this. It's not just him alone there with his coworker. It's not just you alone with that family member or friend. All of us are in this together, and God has told us through Paul's words here, we need to pray for one another in this task of making disciples and bringing the gospel. So let's do that. Let's be diligent to do that. And then again, especially not only for us here, but be mindful of those in other parts of the world. Some countries it's very difficult for open doors to the gospel and very difficult to know what to say. I mentioned a country that last time I was here, gave you an update, a Muslim country in South Asia. It's a big challenge for open doors for the gospel. If you could be praying as an opportunity, I'm going to be going there in December. And during the Christmas season, the Muslims are very interested in the Christmas story, especially the birth of Christ. And God's given opportunity to do some outreach where some Muslims will be invited. They're very curious. They revere Jesus as a prophet. And so they last year we did this. We're going to do this again, and I'll have opportunity to speak and actually focus on the virgin birth. Why the virgin birth? In the Quran it mentions he's born of a virgin, but not why. And so they're very curious about that. And so God's opened up an opportunity. We're going to have 3 different banquets in different areas in the country. Could you pray for that? Last year we handed out over 1,200 Bibles, and the Muslims received them gladly as a gift. And so we're hoping to do even more. But it's a challenge. So I need and would ask you to please pray for us, not only for this open door, but for the words to speak as we bring the gospel message to them. And be praying for our brothers and sisters there who live there, their need for the gospel and what to say. We need that wisdom from the Lord, don't we? I remember when I was in college, I was a new believer, and at the school that we went to, the first week of the school year, they would allow all the campus clubs and groups to present their, let the other students know. So they'd give each of us a little table or a booth. And so I volunteered to do our table, our Bible study, and so I was setting up materials and things, and I look over next to me, the table right next to me, and I look up and there's this big sign, UCLA Atheist Club. And so there was a guy standing in front of his table just like I was, and we both were looking at each other's signs. Mine said Grace Bible Study, and then we looked at each other and kind of smiled because we sort of knew what was going to happen next. So I introduced myself, and he introduced himself, and then he said, "I'm the president of the Atheist Club." So here I'm not even a year old in the Lord, and I'm going, that right there, I'm just begging God, Lord, I need wisdom. I don't know what to say right now. God opened up the door unexpectedly, and I needed the words to speak. And so we had a good conversation, and God did give me guidance there in what to say. We need to be doing that for each other. We need to pray, again, not only for workers, not only for witness, not only for wisdom as we witness, that God would open up those doors and give us the words to say. We also need to pray for boldness to say something. And we see this in Ephesians chapter 6. If you could look with me there in Ephesians 6. Right here, following that great text on the armor of God, where Paul describes to them, we face a great enemy, don't we? Our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against an even more powerful enemy, right? People are not our enemies, right? They're the mission field. And so Paul draws this principle out, and he says, look, our struggle is against spiritual forces, against Satan, against demons. And so we need to fight with spiritual means, and we need to defend ourselves with spiritual armor. And so he goes through the different pieces of armor, right? And as he gets toward the end, the last thing he mentions is taking up the sword of the Spirit. And then Paul says these words, beginning in verse 18. After taking up the sword of the Spirit, he says, with all prayer and petition, pray at all times in the Spirit, and with this in view, be on the alert, with all perseverance and petition for all the saints, notice emphasis on prayer, and pray on my behalf, that utterance may be given to me in the opening of my mouth to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that in proclaiming it I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. Again, notice the last subject Paul addresses to the Ephesians is also prayer, just like with the Colossians. And here it's interesting, after going through the armor, you would think prayer would be in there somewhere, wouldn't you? But he doesn't say take up the spear of prayer, does he? He just says pray. And notice he gives, if you were to count the words, he actually gives just as many words on prayer as he does for all the armor of God put together. So this actually is really an emphasis. And it's important to recognize there's a grammatical feature here that we need to see, because in the translation I read, it says pray and be on the alert, and it gives it in the form of a command, right? But actually, in the original language, they are in the form of participles. Now, I don't mean to give you a nosebleed session here, but this is an important thing to understand, because participles, praying, being on the alert, they always modify or support something else. They're not the main idea. They support the main idea. And so I think what's happening here is, as Paul gives instruction to stand firm, to put on the armor of God, this praying, being on the alert, is to bathe that whole process in prayer. That we're to put on each armor in a prayerful mind and attitude. To be praying consistently, frequently, fervently even, as we put on the armor of God. 18th century poet William Cowper said these words, restraining prayer, that is, not praying, we cease to fight. Prayer makes the Christian's armor bright, and Satan trembles when he sees the weakest saint upon his knees. I think this is again, focusing on the fact that we are to partner together in prayer. Notice he says, with all prayer for all the saints. Again, this is a partnership, because we're in this mission together. We face this enemy together. We are to bring the gospel into Satan's kingdom together. We're not alone. And Christ did not intend for us to function that way, or to act alone, but to act together. And here we see the emphasis again, praying together. And notice, Paul did not just say pray for all the saints. He gives a specific focus in that prayer for one another. You see it in verse 19? Let me read it again. Pray on my behalf, he says, that utterance may be given to me in the opening of my mouth. And again, notice here, pray that God would open up a door. Pray that God would give me the words to speak. Same thing he said in Colossians 4. He says, pray that utterance may be given to me in the opening of my mouth to make known with what? With boldness the mystery of the gospel. And then again in verse 20, he asks that in proclaiming it I may speak boldly. So twice here, he asked for boldness. Now, who is it that's writing this? Who is it? Paul. Okay, was this a guy known for his timidity? Was this a guy known for his cowardice? No, right? Think of Acts 14. I remember when he was preaching in one particular city, and they threw stones at him, and they thought they killed him, right? So they threw his body outside the city. And then God revives him, right? Miraculously, he doesn't die, and he gets up, and what does he do? You would think he'd go, okay, I guess they don't want me here. I'm going to move on. No, he goes back into the city. Like, man, this guy's crazy. He's fearless. Acts 17, he was bringing the message of the gospel to the Athenians, being mocked for being, they called him an idle babbler, some idiot, local idiot. Hey, come to us and you need to tell it, what are these words you're saying? So he stands before these great minds of Athens on Mars Hill and boldly tells them, you're worshiping the wrong God. And this guy, he's asking for them to pray for boldness for him. Well, certainly if he needs it, so do we, right? And again, it can be harder, I think, take more boldness even to bring the gospel to our family members sometimes than in other situations. But we need to be praying for one another for boldness. Again, it brings me right back to, are you having those conversations with each other? Like, I really want to share the gospel with this person, but could you pray for me for the open door, for the words to say, and the courage and boldness to say it? And then we need to be praying for other brothers and sisters in other churches, in other countries, for boldness to speak when God opens that door. Are we doing that? Are you doing that? And pray for that, not just in countries where it's hard to share the gospel, countries that are close to the gospel. We need to pray also for countries that are prosperous. America needs this prayer as well, because it's hard for people there to speak because there's so much apathy and comfort, and people don't want to upset other people. So boldness is needed there as well. So please pray for that. Let us be committed to partnering in prayer for Christ's mission. Pray for workers. Pray for witness. Pray for boldness. Again, not just for ourselves, but for one another. And finally, another way we can partner together in prayer in this mission is to pray for the persecuted. Pray for the persecuted. Hebrews 13 draws this out. Book of Hebrews, of course, is focused on the superiority of Christ. And in chapter 10, after presenting a very clear case for that Christ's superiority over Moses, over angels, over all things, as the great high priest, so we should not abandon the faith, but endure. And then he gives specific instructions how to do that. And then when we get to chapter 13, he gives instructions on a variety of topics. He begins with general instruction, let the love of the brethren continue. In verse 2 of chapter 13, he says, show hospitality to strangers. And then he says this in verse 3. Look with me there. He says, remember the prisoners as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are also in the body. Here we're given a very practical way to partner in prayer together. And that is to remember, pray for those who are often neglected or forgotten, the persecuted. He mentions them at the end of chapter 11 as he describes the hall of faith, great hall of faith, and the many that have gone before us. He says this in verse 36 of chapter 11. He says, others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, or mistreated. Same word as in Hebrews 13. So here, just one chapter later, a little more than a chapter later, he again comes back to this. Remember those who are in prison, right? There are those among them who had been in prison. He says, remember those who have been being mistreated. There are those among them who had been mistreated, and those in the past who had been mistreated. I think the context here is remembering those who are suffering, being persecuted for the gospel. Now that word remember, it does mean recall to mind, but it does not just mean recalling to mind. The Theological Dictionary of the New Testament describes it as a, I have it specifically here. The word should not be regarded, yes, as an exclusively mental process. There are many brothers and sisters suffering greatly. I mentioned a few examples last time. Just a month or so ago, in Pakistan, in a village there was one particular area where over 25 churches were burned down, destroyed. Over 300 homes were attacked by extremists, looted, and burned, all within an hour in this particular village. When my wife and I, my wife had a chance to go with me back in March, and I don't remember if I shared this with you last time I was here, but we had met with several believers who, during a Christmas service, were worshiping the Lord. They were singing together, and a suicide bomber rushed into the service and detonated during Christmas. Killed dozens of people. There were some men there we were speaking with as well who were in another service that some gunmen entered into the church service while they were meeting together and just began shooting people. Again, many died from that. My wife and I met several Afghani believers who had fled from Afghanistan when the U.S. pulled out because they had put on these kill lists from the Taliban, who were going from house to house looking for anyone who had helped Americans while they were there, and then anyone who were Christians, and killing their children first and then the parents. And just listening to their stories. So many. And you know, as I spent time there, I've been made more acutely aware. God's been bringing this passage in Hebrews to my mind more and more. We need to be remembering them. You know, it's interesting that as I'm with them, the first opportunity I had to speak at it was a mission conference that many had been brought together from the underground churches near the Afghanistan border. And we were meeting together, and I presented a message on being motivated for the mission. And at the end of the message, a man stood up, and they'll often do that after a conference. They'll stand up and give feedback on things they learned. And he's crying. And I thought, oh, wow, he must have been really impacted by my message, you know. And he stood up and he said, this is the first time I've been able to sing out loud with other Christians in 3 years. I just was so humbled. 3 years. Another lady stood up, said the same thing. And then another lady stood up and said, you know, brother, we feel so alone here. And what she meant by that was, just as persecuted church, they're meeting underground, that they don't feel that connection with the rest of the body of Christ. And so, you know, when I've told them there are brothers and sisters praying for you from the U.S., from the Philippines, they go, really? Like, it's not just a token statement, you know, I'll pray for you. No, it's like there are people praying, and they're so encouraged. I called a pastor. He had a Facebook, call him through Facebook as he was heading to that village. His parents lived there, and that's where he grew up. So he was going back there to see if they were okay. And I called him and just, you know, wanted to encourage him. I prayed with him, and he's, you know, crying. He says, "Thank you so much. This means so much that you remember us." I was at a church in the southern U.S., partnering church, and we were praying together for the saints there. And so I said, hey, can I record a quick video with you and to tell them? And so we recorded a video to just let them know we've been praying for them and for some specific things. And I sent that to some of the pastors over in Pakistan, and they were so encouraged. Like, wow, you're really praying for us. It like meant so much. And I think if we were in prison or if we were suffering for the gospel and we knew others were praying for us, that would not just be a kind expression, but it would mean something. And it means something to them. And I think that's why the instruction here, remember those who are in prison as if you were there with them. This is a command. We need to be doing this. This is how we partner in the gospel, even with people you may never meet personally. And yes, God knows their needs. Yes, God understands their concerns. Yes, God cares. It's not like we have to pray so that God is made, oh, I didn't know about that situation. Thanks for telling me. No, He knows. But He wants us in this together, with and for each other, to be concerned with the gospel mission, not just in our little circles, but also for those among us who are being mistreated and suffering for Christ. These are the super saints, and they need us to be praying for them. Just as we should pray for one another, pray especially for the persecuted, because that word remember, as I said, it's not just to recall to mind, but it is recalled to mind with the expectation that we would respond to that memory, to that remembering. Paul, even at the end of Colossians, the last thing he said was, remember my imprisonment. And he didn't just mean, hey, I'm in prison, I just wanted you to know. Right? No, at that time, the Romans, they did not provide money or food or needs. They didn't provide those things for prisoners. You were dependent on other people, friends or family, to do that. So I think when Paul puts that statement there, remember my imprisonment, he's saying, hey, I need help. Now, how can we help as we remember brothers and sisters who are being imprisoned in other lands? What's something we can do right here, right now even? We can pray, right? We have a great example of this in Acts when Peter was in prison. Remember? And there's an angel releases him, frees him, and he goes back to the house, and there's a group of believers there. What were they doing? You remember? Right? He knocks on the gate, and Rhoda comes up, and hey, it's Peter, right? She's so excited. She leaves him at the door and runs in. And they had been praying for him. They were partnering together with Peter. Even though Peter was in prison, they were praying for God on his behalf, praying for Peter to the Lord. So remember those who are in prison, those who are being mistreated. So I want to challenge you, encourage you. Would you be committed to doing that? If you go to www.persecution.com, the Voice of the Martyrs does a really good job of identifying believers in other lands who are suffering or being persecuted or in prison. And then also, too, as you learn of things, as you do outreaches and missions overseas, actually one of the brothers from Pakistan had came to visit in Cebu. You didn't meet him, did you, TJ? Did you meet Morris when he was here? No, but you did, Nigel, right? Yeah. So it was a great opportunity that Lord now has brought him here. We were able to interact with him a little bit. And as we get to know those who are overseas, we can be praying for them. So would you commit to doing that? Prayer is such a vital part of the Christian life. And we know that, right? It's one of those topics, too, that, we kind of, oh, no, he's going to talk about prayer today, right? It's hard for all of us. It's a challenge for all of us. But it really should be our first response, not a last resort, right? And especially in this area of our gospel mission, we really need to be dedicated, devoted to praying for one another, to partnering together in that mission through prayer. I'm reminded of our Lord's last night before the crucifixion. He's in the garden. Do you remember what he was doing? He was praying, wasn't he? And his disciples were there. What were they doing? I think something that might happen to a lot of us in prayer times, And so the Lord, right after he's praying, he comes over to them, right? And what did he say to them? It's very interesting. Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour? What has he expressed in that statement? Right? Even our Lord expressed a desire for partnership in prayer. That should be motivation enough for us to recognize the importance and need to be partnering together in prayer. That final night, Jesus wanted his brothers to be in prayer with him and for him. And so I wanted to give us an opportunity as we close our time together for us to do that. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to consider these things, to pray for workers, pray for witness, pray for wisdom, boldness, and the persecuted. So just ask the Lord to bring those things to mind, and I'll give you time to do that, and then I'll close us together in a few minutes.